cushions, I mean, it's Hannah's fault. She won't actually be able to get to us, but we'll get to that in a minute. Really, really good to see you all. Really, really good to have PoetryEast, nearly called it something else, PoetryEast live in person. It's interesting, isn't it? We've got this new form of in person. 2 years ago, no one ever said, is it in person? So this is in person. It's also live on YouTube. So I think we're live now. Brita is she's giving us a sign. So we're now being broadcast across the world. So I need to look up at that strange little blue light up there. You can look as well if you want to. Welcome the world. So welcome to those of you who are tuning in online, either now at this very moment or in the future, because of course it means that this evening will be on YouTube. It's been as I said, this is the first time we've had an in-person event since, of course, like everything else, we had to close. We closed the London Buddhist Centre for the first time in its history. We've managed to get through all sorts of things at the London Buddhist Centre, and then we just closed. It was quite a shock for us. And what we did then is we tried to get online as much as we can. And in a way that opened up new possibilities, at least, for the Buddhist Centre, but also for PoetryEast. So I've interviewed Ian McGilchrist, the scientist. We interviewed Rupert Sheldrake. We've interviewed Langdon Hammer about the poetry of James Merrill. Soon I'm going to be interviewing Angie Malinko. I don't know whether people know Angie Malinko's work, an American poet. And later on, just before Christmas, I've got Alexander McCall Smith, whose books have sold 30 million copies. And guess what? That isn't poetry. But wouldn't you have loved to be able to say that your books have sold 30 million copies? Anyway, he's actually just produced his first poetry collection, so I'm going to be talking to him about that. So welcome to everybody. Welcome to everybody online, as I said. Do check out the London Buddhist Centre YouTube channel, because it's got all of those interviews. It's got an interview with Mimi, for instance. Mimi Calvati here is our unofficial patron. I tried to erect a kind of throne for her, but she refused it anyway. Quite rightly too. So I'm really pleased to be in conversation tonight with Hannah Lowe. I first discovered her poetry reading the Bloodaxe anthology, Staying Human. And sometimes you just read an anthology. I don't read many anthologies, and you just happen on one or two that you really like, and then you want to follow that up. And we're going to hear, I thought we'd actually start our conversation by the one that I happened upon. Whether that's one that Hannah would like to start with or not, I don't know, but that's what we're going to do. So, Chick, which is Hannah's first collection, was a winner of the Michael Murphy Memorial Prize, and The Kids, which she'll be reading in the second half, is a Poetry Society choice. She was also named as the 20 Next Generation Poets. What we're going to do this evening is a bit different to the usual poetry. So some of you are regular, some of you have never been here before. I should have said particularly welcome if you've never been here before, particularly welcome if you're new to the London Buddhist Centre. Even more welcome if you're new to poetry, because that would be exciting if you were new to poetry. Yeah? Hands up if you're new to poetry. One. Okay. So if we were trying to get funding, to stretch poetry to new audiences, we would have failed. But you try your best. I've got this terrible cold. I'll just share this with you. Everybody's got this terrible cold, haven't they? Apparently it's to do with our immune system being weaker than usual because of lockdown. So let's just get you up here, Hannah, and start, So really nice to have you at PoetryEast, Hannah. Really, really good.
Lovely to be here. So nice to see so many people, friends and new faces. So thanks so much for coming out tonight, everyone.
So I thought we'd just plunge into that poem that I've taken the liberty of choosing the poems for tonight. You do. So let's just plunge into that first poem, Dance Class, which is a poem that, in a way, I discovered you. I thought we'd start with that.
Yeah, no problem. Do you need to know, I think, that my dad was from Jamaica, he was Afro-Chinese, and my mum is white and English. Dance class. The best girls pose like poodles at a show, and Betty Finch in lemon, gauze and wrinkles swept her wooden cane along the rows to lock our knees in place and turn our ankles. I was a scandal in that class, big-footed giant in lycra, joker in my tap shoes, slapping on the offbeat while 100 tappers hit the wood. I missed the cues each time. And after, in the foyer, Dad, a black man, stood among the Essex mothers clad in leopard skin. He'd shake his keys and scan the bloom of dancers where I hid and whispered to another ballerina, "He's the cab my mother sends for me."
Thank you. Thank you. I think we've got some more people coming in, so what we might do is we might need to get some mats and cushions and put people there, but we'll see. We'll just see how it goes. So my wonderful team will whiz around and make all that happen. Meanwhile, if you can concentrate on us, it's like a concentration thing. So I wanted to actually start slightly technically and just ask you about the sonnet, because that's a sonnet. Everybody got that immediately. That's a sonnet, and the kids that we're going to come back to talking about in the second half, that's the whole book of sonnets.
Yes.
So makes you wonder what it is for you and the sonnet. Well, say something about that, I thought.
I think it's not just the sonnet, but maybe a thing for me and form, poetic form, and the fact that when you're forced to do something with rhyme or metre, it pushes your imagination into a new place. So I always admire people that can write free verse well. For me, that's like jumping into the Pacific, whereas I like a swimming pool with lanes and rules and a square, which is what the sonnet is a little bit like, I suppose. And I guess, in that poem, it's a poem about regret, but it's also a love poem, as lots of my poems are, to my dad, or in the case of the kids, to the young people I taught for a long time, and to my teenage friends and my own teachers. So there's also the energy of the sonnet felt like a good form.
And say a bit more about your dad. I mean, we're going to talk about your dad, but one of the lovely things about reading you is this relation that you feel like your father is very, very present. Your mother as well, but we'll come back to that in the second half. But your father, particularly in Chick, is very, very present. I think you dedicated the collection to him.
Yeah, well, Chick was his name. It was It was one of his 3 gambling monikers. So as I said, my dad came from Jamaica. For all of my childhood and, until he died, his only work was being a professional, he would call himself a professional gambler. The truth of it is he was a card shark, and he used to play poker and dice and kaluki in the sort of gambling dens of the East End. So 5-6 nights a week he would be out seeing a man about a dog, he would say. Whereas my mum had a much more orthodox life as a primary school teacher, so it was quite an unusual upbringing, although of course you might say that everyone's upbringing might be unusual, and I suppose I just thought mine was normal. It was only when I got chatting to other kids in the playground, what does your dad do? Mine's a bank manager, or mine's a milkman, and I'd be like, mine's a night worker. umbrella term.
Slightly tricky one.
He had a phrase about his work, his playing cards. He said, if you can't win it straight, win it crooked. So that's what I became very interested in after he died, because he didn't really talk about much of this stuff when he was alive. So I guess he died when I was in my early 20s, and then after some time I went on this sort of extended search really to discover more about him. And I suppose writing is a method of inquiry, and that's where my inquiry has taken place in poetry.
So let's hear a bit more about that world, because I want to talk about the world you've come from. Let's hear that poem Grandmother, which I couldn't decide actually whether to start with dance class or grandmother. I thought I was very struck by both of them.
So my grandmother, or my father's mother, was very, very young when she had him, and he never really spoke that much about her, so she's very much the grandmother of my imagination. But one of the things I do know about her is that she married quite a wealthy man later on in life, and he gets a mention in the poem Grandmother. My grandmother comes calling on cold nights in England. She is no old lady. She wears honey-coloured stockings, red dresses with nipped waists, paints her nails exotic flower shades, smells of oranges, hibiscus. Lord, girl, she says from the end of my bed, how come you white? How come so tall? And she mutters Cantonese to my bedroom walls. And when I wake, she's at the mirror, scratching in her eyebrows with the charred end of a match, saying, Mr. Walwyn Pennyfeather, I curse the day I heard that name.
So tell us sort of more about that world that you were in, because in the poem there's your brother, who tricky things with your brother, then your father, and tell us something about growing up in Ilford with a black father, and how. I was struck by that line, how come you white? Yes. That must have been a question.
Yeah, it was one that I asked lots of times. Yeah, I mean, I think in some ways my dad was it was very easy to sort of see that there was a sort of black man, and then there was my mum who was white, and then me and my brother that looked white, passed for white. And I just thought it was growing up, I just thought it was a weird anomaly in some way. I never thought I was like the milkman's daughter, because I actually looked like my dad, but I had no real understanding of it. But one of the things, I always knew that he had come from Jamaica, and that his father, who was Chinese, had come from China to Jamaica. But I knew nothing about why. I guess I thought my grandfather must have taken a wrong turn, on the way from China to somewhere else, And that's partly because at school we weren't taught anything about the Chinese community in Jamaica. And still now, talking to lots of people, they'll say Chinese in Jamaica, and there's a very big Chinese community in Jamaica because of the legacy of indentureship. After slavery, the Chinese and the Indians were indentured to the Caribbean, and that's where the Chinese presence begins. But I didn't know any of this growing up in Ilford, Essex. I just look at my dad and think, why on earth are you here? And you've been here for 40 years as well. It's like, how did you come all the way from that island in the sun to here?
And what was it like having a black father at that time? I can't remember when you were born. I don't know.
1976.
Right, yeah.
So I'm 21. Well, I mean, I was asked often, is that your dad? I mean, and I think, when you're young and you want to fit in and, with other children, peer pressure and everything. I did once or twice literally disown him, and it wasn't just because of our racial difference. I think that's important to underscore. He was also really old compared to everyone else's dad. He was 52 when he had me, and so when he used to turn up at ballet or to pick me up from school, I mean, one of the things about being a card player was that he was also like a house husband, because he would sleep, he'd go to sleep at 6 a.m, be up by midday, he'd do all the cooking, he was very domestic, and he did a lot of ferrying me round, and because of that, he would often turn up at the school gates, not looking completely dishevelled, like he'd just got out of bed, wearing his sort of dodgy belted Mac. And he just looked so unlike all the other Essex dads at the time, And he was a traumatised man, for sure. On a more serious note, he came from a background of real abuse by his own father, and then the kind of traumas of post-war migration. He would have been a victim of racism, and I mean that's how he ended up being a gambler. He didn't have chances to do anything else. He had little formal education. He was very much self-educated and a very committed socialist as well. So a man of many parts, but he didn't talk. He was a very silent man, and I think what silence seems to engender in anyone that comes from a similar background of maybe what you might, kind of background of trauma or intergenerational trauma, is it makes the next generation desperate to know more. And that's certainly been where where this whole journey with writing for me began.
Indeed. Well, let's carry on with your father. I thought we'd get you to read Three Treasures and talk more about that. And
sure. Three Treasures. This was a commission, this poem, for the 2012 Olympics, they wanted someone to write, you know, that felt affiliations to more than one culture or nation. And I thought, well, I've got, you know, 3. So it's worth saying that when I was growing up, my nan, my mum's mum, lived downstairs and we lived upstairs. And my nan was a right old racist. And she features in some of these poems. So it's kind of very uneasy, you know, racial cohabitation. But it always makes me laugh that my parents were parading their miscegenation above my nan's head. So, 3 treasures. Jamaica in the attic in a dark blue trunk, seesaw in the hinges. What must it look like, all that wide blue sea? England downstairs in a rocking chair, Nana rocking with her playing cards, cigs and toffee, tepid tea. Jamaica frying chicken in the kitchen, pig snout in the stew pot, breakfast pan of saltfish and ackee. China in the wonton skin, gold songbird in the brittle porcelain, pink pagoda, silk settee. Jamaica in the statues, lignum vitae heads of dreadlocks, and Nancy, rebel spider, in the storybooks, the poetry. England eating peaches on the patio, hopscotching. Mum in wellies, secateurs around the rosebush and the raspberries. England painting midnight with a sparkler, cousins sewing guy fawkes on the bonfire, orange, ash, confetti. England for the English, in graffiti on the roundabouts and bus shelters, please sir on TV. Jamaica on the phone at 3 a.m, my father's back home voice through fuzz and crack, my friend, long time no see. China in the Cantonese he knew but wouldn't speak, in letters stuffed in shoeboxes, ink stick calligraphy. China in his slender bones, in coral birds of stitched bamboo. China in an origami butterfly that flew.
That's a lovely poem. Very lovely poem. Why don't you read it again?
Really?
Yes. Well, I'd like to hear it again anyway. And I'm in charge here. It's like a powerful place.
If you're sure. 3 treasures. Jamaica in the attic in a dark blue trunk, seesaw in the hinges. What must it look like, all that wide blue sea? England downstairs in a rocking chair, Nana rocking with her playing cards, cigs and toffee, tepid tea. Jamaica frying chicken in the kitchen, pig snout in the stew pot, breakfast pan of saltfish, ackee. China in the wonton skin, gold songbird on the brittle porcelain, pink pagoda, silk settee. Jamaica in the statues, lignum vitae heads of dreadlocks, and Nancy, rebel spider, in the storybooks, the poetry. England eating peaches on the patio, hopscotching, mum in wellies, secateurs around the rosebush and the raspberries. England painting midnight with a sparkler, cousins sewing guy fawkes on the bonfire, orange, ash, confetti. England for the English, in graffiti on the roundabouts and bus shelters, please sir on TV. Jamaica on the phone at 3 a.m, my father's back home voice through fuzz and crack, my friend, long time no see. China in the Cantonese he knew but wouldn't speak, in letters stuffed in shoeboxes, ink stick calligraphy. China in his slender bones, in coral birds of stitched bamboo. China in an origami butterfly that flew.
Well worth hearing again. In a way, poetry is a form, the only form written to be reread, isn't it?
Yeah.
So,
and I like hearing poems read twice, but
yeah.
maybe no less so reading them twice, maybe. So sorry.
So, say a little bit more about this relation between your nan and your father, because that sounds a bit tricky.
Oh, she hated him. My God, yeah. But the thing is, in a way, his path had already been made for him because my mum when my mum was 18 in Ilford, she used to get the bus up to the jazz clubs in Ilford, and her first boyfriend was Joe Harriet, the jazz saxophonist, who was twice as old as her. And she brought him home, and my nan had a blue fit about that. And so my mum always said that Joe was a brilliant musician, lousy boyfriend, a very talented alcoholic. And so I think almost like my dad might have shaped up quite well in comparison. Gambler, several children, a couple of wives beforehand, but but they lived, there was a lot of tension between them. I think there was a time when I've got a story where they wanted to do some building work downstairs, and it involved my nan having to leave downstairs and come upstairs and live with us for a bit. And then the builders turned up, and it was all my dad's friends from the gambling club, like Trinidadian Paul and another guy from St Lucia. And my nan, she refused to come up. I'm not letting all those blacks into my house, blah, blah, blah. So my dad threw a rock through her window. And said, "Now you have to come up, don't you? You can't stay down here." So, it was on both sides. It was, a lot. I think over the years, yeah. So when she died when I was 6, it obviously was sad, but I think there was some sense of relief, that particular tension would be over.
Good heavens. Let's go on with your father for a bit and do this. My Father's Butterflies, which I really like.
Yeah. What page are we on? 14. It's a poem about my dad very rarely talked about what he did at night with cards. We had this brilliant manual dexterity with his hands, and very occasionally would do card tricks for me and my cousins, my brother. My father's butterflies looked more like birds, I thought, made of paper, tightly folded, edge to point to corner. His fingers gently worked the lines and creases so the wings would beat upon their axes and the butterfly have life. I took my bristled brush and ink and dabbed the look I wanted on each one. Ruby splashes, careful petals, polka dots, black dashes on their backs, so they belonged to me. In his palms, the painted paper body rested like a pair of playing cards, perhaps a 10 of hearts or 6 of spades, what faced me when he cut a deck in 2 and told me, "Blow on the butterfly," and I blew.
That's lovely. That's very lovely. One of the things I wanted to sort of talk to you about in terms of your poems is what struck me about them, reading them, is the main feeling of reading your poems, I think, is one of humanity. That they're very humane. That they're at pains to be unpretentious. There's no clever tricks. They're often in form, as you say, sonnets and so on. It really reminded me a bit of Elizabeth Bishop talking about her fear of unearned weight. She didn't want unearned weight. She was very allergic to that in work. And how tricky that is. To find, because I think what you're trying to do in your poems, at least how I read them, I think you're like Bishop in that way, is nervous of unearned weight, and trying to find the weight that's in your life, if you see what I mean, and trying to find that through form and so on. I don't know whether that's your sense, but trying to...
It's nice to be compared to Elizabeth Bishop. So thanks. I suppose it's that thing about, Socrates, to bring in some weight there, the unexamined life is not worth living. And I suppose I've often thought back that I tried to make sense of my life through writing, and to sort of make what has often been quite difficult or painful to kind of bear witness to that, but also sort of make it beautiful, I suppose. Kind of always, I think poetry, when I came to poetry quite late in life compared to some writers, I wasn't writing when I was 15, 16. Thankfully, none of my teen angst is in any notebooks or typed up anywhere. But as a kid, I'd loved drawing. and painting and music. I played the piano from when I was 4, and I still play now. But it was my big thing, music, even and singing to some degree as well. So when I came to poetry in my late 20s, it felt, because you lose these hobbies, these passions really. You're sort of educated out of them at school, and then 16, I discovered boys. So, that kind of cancelled a few things out for a bit. And then when I came back to poetry, it really felt like coming home to those two things that I'd really loved.
To drawing and music?
To art, and to music. And I think that's where some of the formal, if I've got any formal skill, I know it comes from being able to, do time signatures in music exams and all that kind of stuff. And I suppose that thing about unearned weight, I mean, in a way, it's not that I don't want to be a clever poet, like doing tricksy things with loads of conceits, but I suppose I write in the way that sort of comes to me. And I guess I want to write in a language that people can understand, and I want to put down on paper the vernacular of the place that I grew up, and the vernacular of, say, in the kids, the vernacular of the young people that I taught as well, and to say that poetry can contain those voices. It doesn't have to, all be high culture and have certain levels of formality. But I do admire, poets that do many more tricksy things. But the form is the trick in my work, I think, often.
Yeah. And the form in your work is, in a way, this is something I wanted to say later as well. But it's very unobtrusive. Like, you use rhyme quite a lot, but it's quite soft rhyme. It's quite unobtrusive. Even the form, the formal parts of it. Sometimes you think, oh gosh, it all rhymes, of course. It's quite unobtrusive, isn't it? There's a sense of your sensibility being somebody who doesn't want to. What's the opposite of obtrusive? Be obtrusive.
I think there's a sort of magic that goes on for me when you get into writing, and when you're looking at every single rhyme and trying to find those rhyming words. It's almost like the lines, they don't start writing themselves, but when you find the right rhyme, it takes the poem to such a different place. And then there is a sort of sense of something operating not fully in my own conscious mind. The rhyme is doing that, and often I guess it's the right rhyme. So there's kind of heavy rhymes. I think they have, they work in lots of places in poems. Maybe if you want to go for a couplet, or there's a reason that you want to have two perfect rhymes because the two concepts that you're writing about are twinned, or because they're untwinned, they're opposite, and then you might want a heavy, strong, noticeable rhyme. But I guess the poems that I love that rhyme are the ones where you read them again and they're, bloody hell, that rhymes, So, but on the other hand, I'm using a rhyming dictionary. Rhymer.com is my friend.
Noting that down, Rhymer.com.
Yeah. But even those rhyming dictionaries, in all seriousness, it's quite interesting what technology does, or has done with the digital world, because there are 2 rhyming dictionaries online that I do use, and they're both very different, and they bring up different rhymes, and I go to one for one thing and another one for another. So there's Rhymer.com, and then Rhyme Zone is another one which comes up with much stranger rhymes. So but I like rhyme. We're born into song and music and rhyme, aren't we? So I guess that's always close.
And then you were saying before, the sort of difficulties and pain of your life. Do you think that form is also a way of sort of, has it been a way of sort of being able to objectify that a bit, or sort of step out of that a bit?
Yeah, it's a container in which to pour your, your thoughts and feelings, isn't it? I guess, and I suppose so. Definitely is less so in recent work, but definitely in Chick, when I was really beginning to think about my feelings about my father's death. He died when I was 22, and I sort of sat on that. It wasn't just the grief of losing a father, it felt like the grief of losing all my connection or knowledge to Jamaica or to China. All of that story was gone. So it was a huge weight. And then when I started writing about it, it was so, I'm going to use the word, it was very healing. It really, really was. And form was part of that, because I kind of started, almost like, if there was one layer of wallpaper on the wall, I was able to put another layer over the top in the poem, in the form of the poem. So something about holding it, containing it. So that when you're trying to rhyme one word with another, you start basically lying, right? You're basically making stuff up. And for me, there was a kind of comfort in that. It felt like you could almost like give the situation or the moment a second chance, a nicer gloss, some varnish, or what other metaphors am I going to go for here? They all seem to be like decorative. But, you know, there was a way of, I don't know, shining things a bit. And so much so that when you're so like deeply involved in the poem, in the writing of it, and then in the performing of it, and over years now since Chick, I can't quite remember the real truth. Right, you know, and sometimes I have to remind myself of my father, the real man, because he's very different from the man that I've immortalised, I suppose, in writing. And sometimes I can see him going, "Oh God," you know, stop.
Yeah, cool. So let's hear another poem. Let's hear Chick, you know, the title poem, because again that brings in the sort of more Chinese, you know, sort of ancestry of your dad.
Yeah, I should say that my dad had 3 nicknames by which he was known in the gambling world. And as a kid, you know, these gravelly voices on the phone, they would phone and ask for Chick or Chan or Chin. So those are the 3 names. But Chick was the most common. Chick. We talked about you all the time. Dan said he saw you ironing cellophane. I said you'd let me hold £1,000. We found a hollow-soled shoe. My cousins loved your tricks. They'd follow the lady, search your sleeves, blow luck into your fist. Mum called you a croupier. At school, I said you drove a cab. Most days you were back at dawn. I watched through a crack as you slept, a hump of blankets in the purple light, the smell of sweat. I saw you once, Dad, knelt over cards strewn on the floor, panic in your face. For God's sake, Chick, you said. You couldn't do the marks. Then, each Tuesday, £16.30, a paper, tobacco, 1 hand of kaluki, you sunk into the settee like you'd been kicked there, shouted in the bathroom, asked me for money. At the wake, a ring of phlegmy men with yellow eyes and meaty skin told me what your name meant, placed the ace of hearts across your coffin, flowers shaped as dice.
Let's hear that one again as well, I think.
I don't want to give you a remix or something.
I mean, I'm enjoying this kind of power, you know.
Chick, we talked about you all the time. Dan said he saw you ironing cellophane. I said you'd let me hold £1,000. We found a hollow-soled shoe. My cousins loved your tricks. They'd follow the lady, search your sleeves, blow luck into your fist. Mum called you a croupier. At school, I said you drove a cab. Most days you were back at dawn. I watched through a crack as you slept, a hump of blankets in the purple light, the smell of sweat. I saw you once, Dad, knelt over cards strewn on the floor, panic in your face. For God's sake, Chick, you said. You couldn't do the marks. Then, each Tuesday, £16.30, a paper, tobacco, 1 hand of kaluki. You sunk into the settee like you'd been kicked there, shouted in the bathroom, asked me for money. At the wake, a ring of phlegmy men with yellow eyes and meaty skin told me what your name meant, placed the ace of hearts across your coffin, flowers shaped as dice.
That's really lovely. Thank you. Really lovely. So what we're going, I'd like to finish with one more poem. Then what we'll do is we'll have a cup of tea. We always have a cup of tea here, and then we're going to in a second. I forgot to mention. I'm so out of it. I don't know what I'm doing. I forgot to mention that we've got jazz. Did anyone notice that? Weirdly, I didn't mention that. People thinking, is anyone going to mention the drums? Anyway. Anyway, so I'm usually much more respectable than this. So in the second half, we're going to come back in a minute, and we're going to hear some poems and some jazz, and then we're going to go on to the kids, the new collection, because I want to make sure we give enough time for that.
Thank you.
Then there'll be another break, and you can get the books, and then there's going to be a jazz set for half an hour after the interview, after the conversation. So you've got like a new kind of evening. Anyway, just to mention that there is jazz, and that's why there happens to be a double bass and So let's finish this section on Chick with the final poem, The Day, which is a sestina. A devilish form to do. Do you want to say a little bit about the form?
Yeah, I've only ever written this one, and I don't know if I'll ever write another one.
No, that's right.
But it's a beautiful form, It's a kind of meditative form because of the repeated words. I don't know if you don't know the form. Can I remember the form? It's that 6 words are repeated at the end of each line, and then across the next stanzas, of which there are another 6, those same words are repeated but in a prescribed order. And then the last part, the last stanza, is a 3-line stanza that uses all 6 words in a particular order. Do have a go at home.
Do you want to tell us what the repeat?
Yeah, I mean, can I just say as well, I've not read this poem in a long, long time. My glasses are the wrong ones, and I haven't read in public for 2 years, so do forgive me if I fluff anything up. But the words are arms, hill, things, danced, man and sand. Okay. And there's a little epigraph for this poem that is so small I can't read it, but it's by William Blake. And it says, the sun does arise and make happy the skies. The day. We took the wild path from the smuggler's arms, across the chalk man's limbs, down the hill towards the sea. We were small bright things crouched by sandcastles and moats. We danced across the dunes. There was one black man on the beach, and he buried me deep in the cold, wet sand. The day was made from spades and buckets, sand and seagulls, salted air and sunburnt arms, from waves that tugged the shore where the black man stood in rolled-up jeans, the scraggy hills around the beach, the breakers that we danced between. We only knew this way of things. We plucked the shells and pebbles, shiny things, our keepsakes. We wrote our names into the sand and swam the tide to where a red boy danced on the wide blue water. We called and raised our arms, but the waves were rough, as high as hills. We couldn't catch the eye of the black man watching on the pier. Behind the chalk man loomed. We didn't understand these things. The black man said the Saxons etched the hill, their effigy, more fixed than names in sand like ours. I lay back in the black man's arms as he talked and watched the others dance, read children at the shore, a long, slow dance for the day's end. In the sand, the black man wrote his name. I lay on spindly arms of seaweed. Then we gathered up our things. Goodbye, goodbye, and ran across the sand, clambering up, away, across the hill. We turned back once to look from the top of the hill. His name had disappeared, and seaweed danced in silhouette across the level sand. The sun had set, and down the beach the black man, a tiny figure, walked on to other things, as we did on the wild path, arm in arm, trailing sand across the darkening hill. Then slowly past the smuggler's arms we danced, the beach, the sea, the black man, lost, forgotten things.
That's really lovely. Thank you very much. Okay, wonderful. So we'll go next door just now, and our wonderful team will serve tea. There's books, of course, on sale. All the 3 books that Hannah's published are on sale, so do grab a book. And then in about 15 minutes we'll come back in and we're going to hear some jazz and something from Chad and something from, and more than something from the kids.
Yeah? Great, thank you.
So those of you online, you might want to run off and get yourself a cup of tea as well.
Yeah, hello.
And we're going to post a Bloodaxe thing so you can buy books as well. Yeah, we can't forget that. So those of you online, you want to buy your books and get a cup of tea.
Lovely. Yeah. Sounds good. I've got to find my other glasses. These ones I know off by heart. But
oh yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
We can't.
Oh, okay.
I'm sorry, I forgot to get you a hot water. I forgot everything.
Don't worry, you're ill.
I'm afraid.
How are you feeling?
Terrible. Like,
Oh, sorry.
normally I am a bit better than this.
No, you're great. You're great. I mean, I have nothing to compare it to, but you're wonderful.
I'm normally sort of a bit more measured, but anyway.
It's all great. I can't see a bloody thing. I've got
Can't
the wrong
you?
glasses. No.
Have
So
you got
I think I've got another pair with me. Otherwise, I might have to nab yours. Are they strong?
Yeah, try.
Go back and forth. No, really. I mean, I'm just like, I can't see.
Yeah, it's rather frightening as well.
Yeah, I'm not used to it. I think I've got another pair with me. But anyway, this is my first time reading in 2 years, so I mean...
You've been doing lots of stuff on Zoom. Yeah, it's weird because when you come off, when you then do something in person again, you really realise how much you've missed.
It's so nice having people here. It's so lovely to do it with an audience. Yeah.
You really...
Zoom, you just feel, I mean, you get off afterwards, you're just like, oh, here I am in my living room again.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, none of the same bars. Thank you. Okay, well, I'm going to go and go look for my... How long is our break?
It's going to be about 15.
Okay.
But I'll come and grab you.
Yeah, let's come and grab you. Okay, so decide.
Yes, it's Michelle.
Oh, bless you.
There's a lodge there.
Oh, it's so
Well, it is interactive,
I'm so not just saying this, I'm so nervous. I'm
because it's like the
Is it Michelle Michelle?
It is.
I'm glad that you have that, because every time I ask to sign something, you sort of think, oh my god, how do you spell Sue? Is that Sue, S-U-O-O?
Yeah.
Are you?
Yeah.
It's a surprise.
Well, they say about left-handers.
Yeah, they do. I'll just literally introduce
Message now. There we go. Okay, great. I'm going to go and find my other glasses because I literally.
I think I might get her to stand down there. Where are you standing?
Ali's going to be here.
She stands
Actually,
here.
no, Ali might be here. Yeah, I'm going to be here. And I'm going to stand here. So she's going to stand here.
Before I get started with you.
Could she stand, could she move the chair back and stand here?
Yeah, that's where the lady on the screen. Rita?
Rita.
Rita?
Rita. Rita.
Oh, yes, yes. Yes, right. Yeah, right now to see you. So ultimately, how are you doing? I love you, Carol.
You were meditating somewhere, right? You were meditating.
Oh, sorry, yeah. So, we were wondering if Hannah is here.
Oh, wonderful. Oh, there you go. So, yeah.
So, I'll go here, Ali will go here. Or if we just tell it, or if we stand here, she can move. Yeah. Aside from I don't more like a hobby.
I mean, you can have those serials who know what right is.
Yeah. I think, yeah, because most mental saying there, but I think her voice might get lost if she's saying there's a lot of noise there. I think, and she, yeah? So it's, so you're going to play that? Cool. That's your first poetry, you mean?
Yeah, I think so.
It's so cool, isn't it? That you should have it.
See now. Actually, is the font bigger? Maybe that's it.
Huh?
The font is bigger than this.
Oh, yeah.
I've got biscuit in my teeth. Oh, so what happened? There were 9. So you printed it out and it said 9 people.
Yeah,
And
then what we realised that they'd sent me the wrong list. So
Great.
then they found another list and there were this amount of people in it, which is more like what I was hoping for.
Yeah.
Because I'm sure we'll get about 30,
I thought
40.
maybe COVID would keep people.
Yeah, people are nervous.
I'm not that nervous, clearly.
No, and I'm sick of being nervous. I can't be nervous.
Do you know, I just think you're going to have to live with that, that's what I think. Yeah.
Otherwise, we'll never
Otherwise,
live.
we're all going to go mad.
Yeah.
Who can spend any more time at home?
Yeah, that's right. Like my poor old mother, you know, like she had a year on her own.
Where is she?
You know, she's 85.
Where is she?
In Henley Garden, you know, little coffee. So she'll never get that year back. She'll keep on like that.
It's right. I think that's right. I mean, you understand that initially, obviously, you had to stop loads of people dying.
Yeah.
But now, we need our lives back. Otherwise, it's going to be like the black stain on our lives, isn't it?
I think we're nearly ready. Okay, I think we're. Are we set? Is Ali there? No, he's not got better glasses. Oh, there's Ali. Okay, so let's resume. As you can see, in my head cold does mean that I said to someone I'm a bit loose. That loose change. Anyway, so what we're going to do just now is I'm going to introduce the band to you. It's nice. I've never been able to say that before. I'm going to introduce the band to you. So we've got Matt on sax. There's again. Stand up, Matt. Justin on drums. And Ali on bass. I've always wanted to do that. So we're going to start with, because I want to sort of plunge a little bit into Chad. I'm not going to be able to talk as much about Chad as I'd like to, because I want to really concentrate on the kids. But what we'll do is we're going to plunge a bit into jazz and Chad, and you'll see why we put them together. And then we're going to be focusing on the kids, which is the Poetry Book Society choice. I was really pleased to see. I mean, you must have been delighted. That's what you really want, isn't it?
Someone's read it, I thought.
Yeah. Which in poetry is quite a thing, isn't it? So, excuse me. So, then the rest of our conversation we'll talk about the kids, and then we'll have a break to buy more books, and then we're going to have about half an hour jazz set, which is the first jazz set ever to happen at the London Buddhist Centre. We are so now.
Wow.
Okay, so.
Right.
This is a
So,
new mode.
I am going to stand up, but I'm going to read 2 poems from Chan. They're both sort of about Joe Harriet. I told you the story about Joe before the break, so all you really need to know is the second poem is in my mum's voice, and it kind of evokes that, the family tensions around Joe Harriet. And in the first poem, I suppose maybe you need to know that the Richard that gets mentioned is Richard Price, my ex-partner, who when I was writing these poems said to me, "You can't just write whatever you want about people in poems." And I thought, yes, I can. Ready? If you believe, ribs. If you believe I saw Joe Harriet play in 1956 and in my good blue dress danced all night in that basement dive below Gerrard Street, Joe howling through his sax, white shirt, sweat soaked and gleaming in the spotlight, you may as well believe any of the things I dream on, listening to his music. The way he smelt up close say of cigarettes and cloves when we took the corner table at the New Friends on Salmon Lane, gnawing the ribs he loved, and in between chews just talking to me in that fatherly way he had. You may as well believe that sometimes I put his records on, and
and just start crying and can't stop crying. Don't even know what I'm crying for. Those decades in history when men like Joe and my father were shadows on English streets, or just the way a melody can get you. I walk the small rooms of my flat, light spilling through the skylights, the treetops just in sight through the glass, and even with all these tears, I'm sort of happy. Richard says, be careful what you do in poems to real people, known people, but surely this poem shows it sings enough to let me wish that Joe didn't start dying so young at gigs he couldn't stand up straight to play, that men he used to jam with didn't see his broken body shuffling down the streets and turn away. In those last morphine days, the dog he saw barking at the window of the 3rd floor ward really wasn't there. Or how could it be? If Joe and me just stepped from the club into this winter night, heading arm in arm down Brewer Street to order steaming bowls of wonton soup. Cherokee has a epigraph this poem from my mum that Lowe, I was playing with fire. You phoned me up, a party, would I go? My mum said, Joe? Who's Joe? A darkie? No, not on your Nelly lady, no you won't. Peach lipstick, lacquered beehive, tweed mist perfume. I took the bus and of course there was no party, just a room with whiskey glasses on the bedside and fag ash on the tangled sheets at dawn. Oh, Joe could play an ace, the Aki Blues and Cherokee. Da, 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 da. He put his sax in hock to pay the rent, said, Betty, can you help me? Had £1 off me on Sunday nights. He had it bad, he'd not been with another girl in weeks. He said, and no, my mother didn't sleep a wink. She sobbed into her mixing bowl. Then off we went to Auntie Connie's caravan. He wore his suit and wingtips on the dunes. He said he loved me in the spinning teacups, then vanished in the night. Oh, he knew a tune, that bastard arsehole drunk. You'll never know, and Cherokee. Da, 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 and no, I couldn't bring him home for Christmas, not over my dead body, lady. He came with flick nice smile and lilac bath cubes, and oh, she sobbed into her mixing bowl. My father walked into the tube, came home and stank of whiskey, said, he's just like any other fella, ain't he, Betty, ain't he?
That's great. No, that was really great.
Yeah, thank
That's
you.
really great. So we'll be hearing more from our jazz trio later on, but you can see it's beautiful. It's really lovely, really lovely. And lovely to have that mixture of poems. That just works so well. Next time we should get you to sing with them, shouldn't we? Do the whole thing.
Yeah, I'm hoping to get discovered. If anyone so pluck me out of the obscurity
well,
of poetry.
someone will be watching this, and this will be a new life.
Well, it's a real tradition actually. Joe Harriet did play with lots of poets.
Oh, did he?
In the kind of poetry and jazz gigs of the 1960s, including like people like Danny Absey, he played with. So it's in a way it's like a lovely echo of those events.
Yeah, indeed.
Thank you so much.
So look, I'd like to talk more about Chan, but we'll need to move on to the kids. Let's just plunge into a poem again, and I want to ask you a bit more about it. I thought we'd plunge into that poem, The Only English Kid.
Sure.
There's so many poems in here I wanted to choose, but I thought we'd sort of start with this one and see what you think.
Okay. I didn't put the page number down, so let me just find it. I suppose it's worth saying that the book is, the first sequence is very much about my years as a sixth form teacher in London. I taught from when I was about 22 for 10 years or something. So it's remembering the students that I taught and what they taught me as well. The Only English Kid. When the debate got going on Englishness, I pity the only English kid. Poor Johnny in his spotless Reeboks and blue Fred Perry. He had a voice from history. "Dunno, miss, yes miss, no miss." All treacly cockney, rag and bone. And while the others claimed Poland, Ghana, Bulgaria, and shook off England like the wrong team's shirt, John brewed his tea exclusively on Holloway Road. So when Asif mourned the George Cross banner swinging freely like a warning from his neighbour's roof, the subway tunnel sprayed with Muslim scum, poor John would sit there quietly, looking guilty for all the awful things he hadn't done.
That's lovely. We might hear that again in a minute. I just want to talk a bit more about it. It could be a long evening, but let's do the jazz thing again.
I'm so pleased when I get through it once.
Yeah, I'm just sort of torturing you. And the striking thing about this, one of the striking things about this book is that it's a book of sonnets, devilishly difficult to do. You managed to make it look, like, I know, singing in the bath or something. I don't know how you manage that. But sometimes it does read like a sonnet crown at times. That they're very strongly sequences, aren't they? So you can sometimes feel, you get to the end of one of the poems and you sort of take off into the next. Anyway, I wanted to see what you thought of that. It feels a bit like a sonnet crown. It's not.
No, it's not, but it did start as my attempt to write an extended crown of sonnets. So I had the idea that I was going to write 50 or 60 interlinked sonnets, where the last line of each sonnet would be the first line of the next one. And I think I got about 35 poems in before I realised it wasn't going to work. And it hadn't been working either. It hadn't ever been working. And it's just so ambitious. And it was very painful for me to realise that I couldn't pull it off. And I had to have a good number of months away from it then. But, someone said to me once about form, that sometimes you can use form as scaffolding and then you can kick it out. And although I have obviously now written this book of sonnets, I now realise that attempt to write the extended crown, or whatever you want to call it, it was the scaffolding, because it's when I did all the really hard thinking about the poems. But it was, and then I began to see that actually they could work as single sonnets. That was a relief.
But they do, quite a few of them take off from the one before, don't they?
Yeah, and that's definitely because of that that effort before to make them interlinked.
Yeah.
Definitely. There was always quite a clear order for me, that the poems would start with my first day of teaching and kind of carry on in a chronological order, and there are poems that are kind of, they're twinned really, because they're about sequential moments or sequential thought processes or something.
I mean, they really, when you read them, they sort of dive into each other very, very easily. So you get taken up in a narrative that takes you through the sequence. You've got this sonnet form that makes you want to slow down, but you've got this sort of narrative wave going. You might think I'm making it up.
No, it sounds great. I mean, yeah.
You've got this like narrative wave that runs through the sequence. So the sequence makes you want to read them like a narrative, but the sonnet makes you want to sort of pause over the language and so on. That's how I thought of it. Anyway.
And I suppose when I started to then sort of almost like reconfigure them as single sonnets, I began to think that even the sonnet on the page maybe echoed, mimetically, the classroom. And so many of the poems were about classroom encounters, like the brief moment in the classroom. And anyone that's a teacher in here will know there's always another moment in the classroom, right? There's always another day in the classroom. It's sort of marked by its repetition and its variation. So 5 years teaching the same novel, 5 years having a lot of resistance to that novel, but every lesson different somehow. So it felt the sonnet was a good vehicle for that as well.
Indeed. Actually, let's just hear that one again, shall we? And then we'll I won't do this all the time, but I am quite enjoying it, weirdly.
Okay. The Only English Kid. When the debate got going on Englishness, I'd pity the only English kid, poor Johnny in his spotless Reeboks and blue Fred Perry. He had a voice from history, the no miss, yes miss, no miss, all treacly cockney, rag and bone. And while the others claimed Poland, Ghana, Bulgaria, and shook off England like the wrong team's shirt, John brewed his tea exclusively on Holloway Road. So when Asif mourned the George Cross banner swinging freely like a warning from his neighbour's roof, the subway tunnel sprayed with Muslim scum, poor John would sit there quietly, looking guilty for all the awful things he hadn't done.
That's lovely, that clicked clear rhyme at the end is beautiful, isn't it? Where do I want to go next?
I don't know, not this one again, I hope. He made her read it 8 times.
That is really bad cold, is that really weird, isn't it? Then it's like jazz thing, but he didn't ever tell anybody about it. I suppose what I thought we might do is go sort of reel back a bit and say a little bit about how come you start, you write in the poems about playing Rachmaninoff and so on. How did you discover poetry, particularly as a read form? Because one of the things you say in the poems is how much you read books and poetry particularly. I'm with you on that. How did that happen? How did you discover poetry? And what got you writing it? What got you from sort of art and music to writing?
I'm trying to give the short answer. I mean, there was poetry in the house when I grew up. And my dad loved poetry as well, and he'd grown up in colonial Jamaica. He could still recite poems by Kipling and Wordsworth and all that. So it was always in the ether. My mum's a primary school teacher. So, there were poems in the house, but I didn't ever think about poetry at all. I studied literature, American literature, post-colonial studies. I loved memoir and those sorts of things. But when I got to, it was actually teaching. It was 2 things happened simultaneously. I had to teach an anthology of 1,000 years of English poetry at the sixth form. And I think in trying to enthuse those students, I think the only person I enthused was me. But I particularly remember being really moved by poems like God's Grandeur, Joe Manny Hopkins, and then at the same time, it's kind of weird, like synchronicity or something. My mum had given me an anthology, the Bloodaxe Staying Alive anthology, and I started reading that and thinking, oh my God, wow, these poems, amazing. And so I started writing in secret. And I kept it a secret for about 2 years. I wasn't in any friendship groups with anyone that was vaguely artistic, so it was weird. And then I, like many poets, many writers, I started going to classes. I I did endless classes, you know, so I became a real student again. But I really felt like I'd found the thing that I loved. But it takes a long time to get any good at it. I remember that. I remember, you know, each poem was like a hard-won effort, achievement, birth, I don't know, whatever. But yeah, so that's what happened.
Yeah, that's great. It's good to hear, isn't it? And teaching, say a little bit more about, because a lot of this, the theme of this collection, the kids, is very much about teaching, isn't it? And you really bring that classroom experience into the poems.
Yeah, well, my mum was a teacher, and she was a teacher during the time that the national curriculum was, in her words, she would say, enforced throughout the land. And so she always said to me and my brother, don't be teachers. And we're both teachers now. So there was a kind of initial resistance to it. But when my father died, at the time I was working in the city, and I used to read my boss's emails, and he called me the world's worst personal assistant. So that strand of my career was not going very well. But I really felt like I had to find more meaning in my life, and so teaching just seemed to be the thing to do, you know. And I knew that I wanted to teach 16 to 19, that age group, because that's the age in which I'd had the most amazing English teachers, and they'd really galvanised my love for literature. I'd gone to a very stuffy traditional school, so it was all, and I think that, you know, that age 16, that's when people become really galvanised and political and looking out at the world and trying to make sense of it. So, you know, the teacher I was never far away from the student that I was, and you know, much of the book is also paying, you know, respect and gratitude to all the teachers that I've had over the years in all kinds of different ways. But and it's only now looking back I realised that those 10 years I did in the sixth form was so profoundly affecting on me in all kinds of ways. I mean, for a start, I learnt a lot about literature because I didn't have an English degree, and I was often only one step ahead than the students, but I had to teach myself an awful lot the night before I would teach it. So I learnt a lot there, but I also learnt a lot about, you know, more kind of political things like the legacies of the British Empire. I suppose I'd learnt about them a bit at university, but when I had a room full of students, most of whom might have been born in Hackney or Stoke Newington and lived in Hackney and Stoke Newington, rarely left Hackney or Stoke Newington, you say to them, where are you from? Are you British? And they would say, no, I am Angolan or Jamaican. And it really started me thinking about, you know, the relationship with those young people to the British Empire, why they felt so disengaged, so disenfranchised by Britain, and ideas of Englishness, because I felt those things as well. The whole time I was masquerading really as like the rest of the department, as a white middle-class English teacher, when I wasn't, you know, and I never talked to the kids about my upbringing or my background, but it made an awful lot of difference when I finally did.
Well, that's a great moment to go into these two lovely poems, Janine poems, because that, you know, that's really focuses on that, doesn't it? So let's hear those.
Okay. Janine. Was a Monday morning queasy feeling. I was never ready for her choice of sting. The late strut in, teeth kissing, rolling eyes, my protest thwacked away like swatted flies, or else the bleat of questions, her pinging hand, a jack-in-the-box, a gun she kept on firing, asking over and over why we couldn't study Harry Potter. Or worse, the searing telescopic stare I winced in as she coiled a lock of hair around the middle finger shone at me. And this went on for months until somebody said the thing and finally brought ease. My dad was half Jamaican, half Chinese. My dad was half Jamaican, half Chinese. Her question at my office door. Her face gone softer, searching mine for vestiges of blackness, as if she'd find a sign, a trace, the more she sought. And when I told her yes, was some fire put out? It's hard to know what heat, or presume a heat at all, or guess the stakes when teachers rarely look like those they teach. The whiteness of my skin has been confusion, chaos, agency. Janine was nicer after, or what's up miss, and hey, like neither me nor her remembered Monday's knackering spun out war. She dropped her gun. I'd somehow been excused. I'd been forgiven.
That's lovely, thank you. It's really lovely. I mean, you really get a sense from that the feeling of those sonnets, they sort of ride like that. And these all of these characters in them, isn't there? They're full of people.
Yeah, I love poems that are full of people. So the students in them, I mean, often they're conflations of a number of real students. Certainly their names are changed. And also I was teaching these students a long time ago now, 20 years nearly, some of them. But yeah, it felt to me that there was sort of the thing that I wanted to say, and then there had to be the student as the kind of vehicle of that, me and the student. Sometimes me and students as well. I mean, lots of funny things happen when you've got a group of students on a theatre trip or a cinema trip or whatever. Or a lot of students turn against you.
Yeah. So let's carry on with the sequence, and let's there's these wonderful poems about 7/7 that I was really struck by. Let's have a look at Ricochet and British Born. I think they're, very strong poems, and say a little bit about all that, perhaps, because.
Yeah, so the time that I was teaching at the sixth form, the 7/7 bombs happened, and a friend of mine was killed in them. So it was a very sad time in our lives then, and in the September after that, July, when the students came back, it was like a marked difference in the way some of the Muslim students were presenting themselves, that their dress had become much more, not all of them, but some of them, they were wearing much more traditional dress. It was the first time I'd ever taught students in full niqab, and some of the teachers were really struggling with that, whereas I was just like, well, we're going to do our best, here. But when you spoke to those students, I had so many moments with students where they would tell me things that I felt very, privilege isn't the right word, but they would tell me what had been happening, and lots of them had been affected by populist Islamophobia, whether it was name calling in the street or police stop and search. If not them, then their brothers or their uncles or whatever. So it's understandable, and I already knew about that because that had been the experience of our black male students for as long as I'd been teaching. But it was a marked shift, and I thought I would try and kind of write about that, particularly when the media, wherever the term first originated, British born, about kids that were born in Britain, so they're British, right? But then you put this born on the end of it, and it implies something, it others them in some way. So I kind of felt a lot for them, those students. So should I read? Yeah. I'll read. There's two poems in sequence. Ricochet. 4 boys blew up 3 tube chains and a bus. My old pal was stood beside a bomber. The police shot a man they said had Mongolian eyes. For days, friends searched the hospitals for her. The wrong man they shot 11 times. We'd heard a voicemail, her saying she was fine. It was summer still when the kids came back. Muslim boys in Nikes and thobes and skull caps, boyish beards that made them look like men. Her face still flashed up on the television. 2 girls swept down the hall in full black burqas. Maniza said a police van took her brother. The papers called the bombers British born. And suddenly, new language, British born, for kids who grew up on terraces in Leeds or tower blocks in Bow, and at weekends tied their bootlaces for footy on the lawn, and went to college to study sports or business or car mechanics, and spoke with accents thick as Yorkshire mud or London bullet quick, yes blood, and in it, and were as British as a pack of salt and vinegar. And no, his teacher hadn't noticed him withdrawing, and no, his mother hadn't wondered who he called at 2 a.m. in the blue-lit bedroom of their bungalow. Despite her scrubbing, the words aglow on the garden wall. Go home.
That's very good, isn't it? That's very strong. That's great. That's really great. I mean, it's a bit of a strange thing, but I thought I'd try and get to your mother as well. There's so many things I want to get into in this. I wanted to hear more of the teaching ones, but it's interesting that in the Chick, it's very much your father's collection. In this, your mother's a very troubled presence in this collection in the kids. So I wondered, you do it whichever way, but you either talk about your mum and then read the poem. It's the longest poem in the book, The Stroke, and it's a very painful poem. Don't know whether you want to talk about that or what you want.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I've written about it in the book, so I must want to talk about it in some way. So my mum, as I've mentioned, she was a teacher, and she was much, much younger than my dad. And the same year that my dad died, my mum had a stroke, and it created profound changes in her life. Like, she had to retire. I mean, she wasn't physically affected, more like emotionally, I guess, and she became a very different kind of person. So the poem is really about, it's that story, and I guess it's me remembering that moment. I hadn't realised, often poems, you go back to look at things that you realise were deeply significant that maybe you hadn't realised at the time. And I wanted to write it sort of about her, but also for her. Maybe stuff I would never actually say to her is in this poem as well. And it's about women's work, I guess.
And perhaps say a bit about the form, because it's a set of sonnets, isn't it, in its own right?
Yeah, so it's a set of, you might call it 5 sonnets, but actually this one is written in 7-line rhyme royal, which is 7-line stanzas of a rhyme scheme. But then I decided I really wanted it in the book, so I thought I had to write an extra verse to make it into 5 sonnets. And then someone called it a sonnet quintet on the jazz theme. So I thought, I'll go with that, but that wasn't intentional. Okay. The stroke. For days after the stroke, she lay bedbound, misdiagnosed. The doctor said Bell's palsy of her weeping eye and tilted frown, her hand cold numb below the eiderdown. The telly in the corner spun blue light and anarchy of voices. My father, dying himself and lost, brought trays of tea and plates of buttered toast. Outside, September shook the leaves down, steered a chain of infants to their turquoise pegs to hang their anoraks and wait for her, small bodies on the story mat, cross-legged. For 37 years, the autumns leapfrogged, time forward rolling on. Strangers stopped her on the high street. "Hello, miss, it's me, remember?" Inside, she heard the freight trains jogging past. My father shuffled room to room and phoned me, which he'd never done, and whispering asked if I would come. I didn't listen to the worry on his tongue. Old friends from university sat huddled at my kitchen bench, late supper, the night's denouement, shots of flamed sambuca with coffee beans for health, happiness, prosperity. I remember her body, glistening in the bath, the rolls of belly, each one pressed against the other, licked by water, and her skin, her veins, blue flowering on porcelain, in the small blue bathroom with its frosted window and rusted taps, a coral print kimono hanging on its hook, its purple ribbon ties, and through the open door I hid and watched her, the secret breasts and stomach, groin and thighs, the way all daughters must survey their mothers. Her body was a blueprint, harbinger of duty, worry, pain. Downstairs, my nan smoked roll-ups, waiting to be waited on. I didn't go until I did. Some arrangement for Dad to drive and pick me up one night, but the sign for Upney Tube, gas blue fluorescent, I waited until an hour late I dialed home in the blunt and pissy light of a payphone on the hill, that slope between the streets where I grew up and the A13 where industry began. Black factories, the dirt blue river, sewage works and gas drums, the toxic heaps of Beckton Alps, old grease and slag and stone. Above the traffic thrum, I heard her lift the telephone, said, "Mum, it's me." And the breath I heard I knew was hers, but when I spoke again, she didn't answer. And when I spoke again, she couldn't speak. Young commuters pushed the station turnstiles, raised umbrellas, rushed off into the dark, and still my mother didn't answer. Rain nailed the phone box, dashes hardening to hail, and I was shouting at her, shouting, "Where is he? Why can't you hear me, Mum? Why can't you hear me?" My dad pulled in, a blur behind his wipers, just lost or late. And then as I was hanging up, she spoke, a word or two I couldn't hear, but her voice was formal, small, like she was high up in a building with an office at the top, with little windows, in a city she didn't know, in a cold blue country,
100 years ago. At home, she wore a too small yellow jumper, laid fetal on the sofa to the telly's constant upbeat chatter. I cooked them dinner, mopped for spills, and when she looked at me, I was the teacher now, and mother. Reluctantly, I took the broom, the duster, the Mr. Sheen, the mop, the bleach, and I began to clean.
That's really lovely. Yeah, very lovely. So look, we need to nearly draw us to a close. But I want to do two more poems. Two more poems before we go. So let's. There's a lovely sequence that starts about this poem about your son. I thought we'd have this poem. The sky is snowing.
Yeah, for my lovely little boy. He's 7 now, probably 4 or something when I wrote this for him. The sky is snowing. The sky is snowing, Rory, and overnight the earth's been eider-downed in feather white. Today is story day, but the schools are shut. The playground with the rails is a bassinet of silent snow. No burglar Bill will go to school today, no Alice or Gruffalo. On the news, a garter snake of cars has slept the night below the frozen stars. The sky is snowing, love, in pale marshmallows and flecks of mint. You're at the kitchen window in your burglar stripes and mask and bag of swag, my little crooked scallywag. Let's lift the window open, just a slip, and catch this snowstorm on your fingertip.
We're going to have to have that again, aren't we?
Really?
Yeah, really. It's the last time I'll do it, honestly.
Okay. Maybe he's watching at home.
Yeah.
So that would be nice. The sky is snowing. The sky is snowing, Rory, and overnight the earth's been eider-downed in feather white. Today is story day, but the schools are shut. The playground with the rails is a bassinet of silent snow. No burglar Bill will go to school today, no Alice or Gruffalo. On the news, a garter snake of cars has slept the night below the frozen stars. The sky is snowing, love, in pale marshmallows and flecks of mint. You're at the kitchen window in your burglar stripes and mask and bag of swag, my little crooked scallywag. Let's lift the window open, just a slip, and catch this snowstorm on your fingertip.
That's really lovely. That's really lovely.
Thank you.
But we must finish with your last poem in the collection, because it's dedicated to Mimi, and it feels, it would be rude not to read it. I mean, we should now lift Mimi up.
Yes, or levitate. Well, there's many praise poems in the book to teachers, but yes, Mimi has helped me enormously with my struggles with form over the years, and my deep felt gratitude to her. Although the poem's actually about yoga.
Obviously.
It's called Kathy, Carla. The body is something like a poem, I guess, as I watch my yoga teacher, Kathy, on the back row mat of Carla's yoga class. Kathy can do King Pigeon, the crow, full monkey, yet here she is in simple forward bend, while Carla lays her palms around her core to push her deeper. Can every pose be deepened, I wonder? Can what's been mastered be mastered more? A poem is something like a body, I guess, when I'm holding somebody else's poem in this sun-filled room they've called a masterclass. But I'm not a master, just a pair of palms which pull or loosen someone's lines. I still need kind and guiding hands on mine.
Wonderful, thank you very much. Just the right poem to end on, I think. Really lovely to just sort of finish the whole thing like a sonnet, didn't it?
Yes.
Like a sonnet. So yeah, we'll have a break in a moment, just for like 10-15 minutes. So do get a chance to buy Hannah's poems. We've got a little gift for you.
Oh, that's so lovely.
Just to say thank you
you.
from Poetry
Thanks
East
so
for
much.
all of your work.
Thank you. That's so gorgeous.
So, do join the Poetry East mailing list because that's the easiest way to for us to talk to you. There'll be people at the door at the end after the jazz set. We can sign you up, and then we can sign you up before that as well. The next Poetry East event is we've got Paul Kingsnorth. We've got that's an online event talking to him about belonging, particularly. It was a very, very interesting thinker, Paul Kingsnorth. Then we've got Angie Malinko, an American poet, again, another online interview. And then I'm going to be interviewing Alexander McCall Smith. And I'm hoping next year we'll get George Saunders. He said when he comes to the UK, he'd love to come. So lots happening at Poetry East, I hope. We're trying to expand Poetry East, so we're talking to scientists, thinkers, poets, but we always want to come back to poets because they're what was it? The legislators. What did Shelley say?
Unofficial legislators.
The unofficial legislators. So let's give Hannah another unofficial legislator. If you buy the book, I'm sure Hannah will sign. I forgot to ask you if that's all right. I'm sure Hannah will sign, and then we'll start a jazz set at like 9:05. Yeah? So do stay on for a jazz set. Yeah. Thanks very much.
Oh, such lovely. Thank you so much. That's lovely questions. Right, didn't it?
It was nice to have, in a certain sense, I just wanted to let the poems have their say in a way.
Yeah, I think it was nice. It was actually nice to read them twice.
It is, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because they go, people aren't very good at listening, and they go past so quickly.
Yeah, and then it's gone.
It's gone.
Bye, Claire. Lovely to see you. Are you running tomorrow? Okay, good. Yeah, good luck tomorrow. Yeah, hopefully, yeah. That work, Jazz?
I love the way you're expressing it. I'm sure you're a tough lady, you know. And as I said,
So that's the end of the online thing as well. So goodbye to everybody online. See you soon. Wave.
And you're definitely
Come again.
beautiful.
Oh, thank you so much. That's very kind of you. Thank you. Bye. I've got a fan though. He just came to see me. He didn't normally come to poetry because I've got golden skin.
It's a whole new thing.
Yes, I'm weird. Nice. Okay, should I go and see if there's any?
Yeah, let's see if we can get
Sorry, I'll put these flowers in. Oh, that was lovely. I'm going to come
all the rest of this.
That's